My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Jubes and Co, the show that we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. I'll tell you what's got Joanna Lumley talking, you know, the actress from Ab Fab. She reckons we've got a problem with victimhood in this country. She reckons we're turning into a nation of pathetic people that seek out desperately something to feel you know, we're over pressure on this is a problem, that's a problem, he's abused me, this, that, the other. Do you agree with her? Are we a bit of a pathetic nation or not? And you know my show, don't you? I don't get into the whole Harry and Meghan thing, so that is not appearing on this show, but what is appearing instead is food banks. You know, did you watch my programme yesterday? We were talking about, you know, the sentence that keeps getting trotted out about nurses having to use food banks, and it got me wondering, it got you talking about the situation with food banks in this country. Has this now all become almost politically weaponised, this sentence, so-and-so needs to go to a food bank? Do you think people are perhaps taking advantage of food banks? And do you think that those people that really desperately do need that level of help are getting the service and support that they need? And the first tribunal has been published today about whether or not a care home was right to be able to sack some of its workers for refusing to have the COVID vaccine. It ruled yes, it was absolutely fine for the employer to do so. What do you make to that? What impact and implications has that got going forward? I think it was a huge overstretch, and still is, to try and demand that anyone should ever be injected with anything. Do you agree or not? And what is a woman? I mean, it's the question that's got everyone stumped, it seems. If you're in the public eye, people used to be able to answer it easily. Nowadays, not so much. Well, a dictionary is on hand to help you understand it. They've changed their definition, or at least added to it, to say that now it can be anyone, quite frankly, that identifies as such. What do you think to that? I personally think it's bonkers, but am I missing something? Tell me. But first up, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you, and good evening to you. The man who murdered a law graduate in East London in June has been sentenced to life in prison and will serve a minimum term of 38 years. Jordan McSweeney pleaded guilty to the murder of Zara Aleena, but he refused to leave his cell for sentencing, saying he didn't want to watch video evidence of his actions. McSweeney was caught on CCTV following at least two other women before attacking the 35-year-old as she walked home from a night out in Ilford. After sentencing, Miss Aleena's aunt said the family live with a profound loss.
Zara's life was senselessly and brutally crushed. And today, like every other day, we live with the horror she was forced to face. Zara was the light, the warmth, the bird song, the laughter in our family. We live with a profound loss each day, and each day we are destroyed a little more.
Zara Aleena's aunt speaking emotionally after the verdict this afternoon outside the Old Bailey. Well, in other news today, GB News has been told up to 4 people may still be missing in the English Channel after a small boat capsized in icy waters. 4 people lost their lives and 43 others were rescued after attempting to cross the English Channel. The search operation is expected to continue until at least 9 this evening. The Home Secretary says the tragedy shows how important it is to introduce new legislation to deter crossings.
These are the days that we dread. Crossing the Channel in unseaworthy vessels is a lethally dangerous endeavour. It is for this reason, above all, that we are working so hard to destroy the business model of the people smugglers, evil, organised criminals who treat human beings as cargo.
Now, the Prime Minister has asked the lawyer investigating bullying allegations against Dominic Raab to consider 5 new formal complaints. The Deputy Prime Minister is now facing 8 allegations, all relating to his time at the Ministry of Justice. Mr Raab has previously denied the claims. Labour is calling for his suspension while the investigation is underway. Now, Downing Street is urging the Royal College of Nursing and ambulance workers' unions to protect patient safety during tomorrow's historic NHS strikes. Comes after the Prime Minister defended the government's support for nurses at PMQs. Nursing staff will walk out in England, Wales and Northern Ireland on Thursday unless a deal can be agreed. Mr Sunak says the government has tried to give them the support they need.
Last year, when everyone else in the public sector had a public sector pay freeze, the nurses received a 3% pay rise. When the RCN asked for more in-work training, we gave every nurse and midwife a £1,000 training budget. And when they asked for nurses' bursaries, we made sure that every nursing student received a £5,000 grant. That's because we do work constructively and we will continue to back our nurses.
But the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the Conservatives can't cope with the amount of industrial action.
After 12 years of Tory failure, winter has arrived for our public services. And we've got a Prime Minister who has curled up in a ball and gone into hibernation. If he can't act on behalf of patients or nurses or everyone who wants these strikes called off, then surely the whole country is entitled to ask, what is the point of him and what is the point of the government he's supposed to be leading?
Now, around half of Britain's rail lines are closed today as RMT members stage their second day of strikes across the country. Thousands of workers at Network Rail and 14 other train companies have all walked out, leaving some parts of the UK with no train services at all. It's part of a long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions, and it comes after the RMT rejected an offer of a 5% pay rise this year, with another 4% next. 6 Chinese officials, including the Consul General, have been removed from the UK over an incident involving a Hong Kong pro-democracy protester. Bob Chan was demonstrating on the grounds of the consulate in Manchester when he was attacked in October. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, says the government made it clear that China must take action against the diplomats. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Back now to Jubes and Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. I've got to say, lots of you emailing in. You're very quick off the mark, you guys, saying you could hear me and Polly having a little off-air chat just before the start of the show. It was Polly and I. Polly was saying she wants to come and sit next to me when she does the news headlines. But Polly, I think that'll probably be like beauty overload. We'll probably break the screens or something if we're both sat next to each other, don't you think? And I've got to say, luckily, there was no choice words used. I think we got off lightly with that one. So sorry if you could hear us chattering away beforehand. Anyway, I am with you until 7 o'clock this evening. Alongside me, keeping me company, these two, you lucky so-and-sos. You do get to sit all the way so close to me, although you're not within hitting distance if I disagree with you. We've got a bit of distance between us. The two gents I refer to is my panel, Nigel Nelson, the political editor of the Sunday People, and alongside him, the director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young. Good evening, gentlemen. You are very welcome, as you are as well at home. It's not just about us three, I say it every night, don't I? It's about you at home as well. I want to know what is on your mind tonight. You can get in touch with me, gbviews at gbnews.uk is the email, or you can tweet me at gbnews. I try my best to read as many of your emails and tweets out. And last night, if you were watching, we got onto the topic of food banks, and I got such a response from you guys at home. I was saying that actually I think they're getting quite weaponised now, the usage of food banks. So many of you wrote in, to the point where actually I thought, you know what, I'm going to visit this topic properly tonight. So that will be coming up later on in the programme as well. But first up, are we a pathetic nation? I'm asking you this because Joanna Lumley, a lady that many of you will know and perhaps love, she's a fantastic actress, she says we've basically gone mad because we're all desperate to be victims these days. The hook to it, she was referencing was the hashtag Me Too movement, but she was meaning a more broader point. Nigel, do you agree with her?
Well, I think that the days of the British stiff upper lip have probably long since gone. And I think that also Joanna Lumley is a rather robust individual, and probably no one would dare to do anything with her. I don't agree with her because I think that without the Me Too movement, you would never have got Jeffrey Epstein exposed. You'd never have Harvey Weinstein in prison. I think it's really important for people to speak up about sexual harassment. I work in the House of Commons, and one of the problems there is people don't speak up because they're frightened about their careers. And I know of MPs who continue to get away with it, especially with younger staff, because people don't get together. So I don't think being a victim and actually announcing the fact is such a bad thing.
But why wouldn't you report them then? If you know, if you're saying that actively going on right now there are MPs that are behaving inappropriately towards their younger members of staff, why don't you do something about that?
I've got no evidence. I would stick it in the newspaper tomorrow if I actually had the evidence. And the issue is that the people involved don't want to come forward. I respect their anonymity. I respect that their desire not to be identified in any way. And the danger of a place like that is the moment you start outlining what has been going on, everyone very quickly knows who the victim and the perpetrator is. But the only way we're going to actually put a stop to it is for people to come forward. I mean, you don't stop a sex pest by staying silent.
Yeah, see, that is worrying because we've had loads of public cases, haven't we, of MPs being in trouble for, you know, doing this, that and the other and being inappropriate. So to hear in your experience as well that it still goes on and that there's more of this, it's not great. And it worries me, upsets me a bit actually that these girls would accept that.
And blokes.
Oh, and blood. Oh, it's all going on in the House of Parliament, isn't it? But it upsets me that actually people would just take that. I wouldn't take someone harassing me. I wouldn't. I would do something about that.
This is it's the nature of politics, really, that a lot of these people are hoping for political careers of their own. They're researchers, young staffers, that kind of thing. And they fear that if they come forward and cause trouble, that would be the end of their political futures. I think it's an absolutely appalling situation. But at the moment, unless they're prepared to band together, come forward and do something about it, it's very difficult to actually take this forward.
What do you make to all of this?
Well, I think on Joanna Lumley's broader point that it's become fashionable to cast yourself as a victim, I think she's absolutely right. And we can see that in the Harry and Meghan Netflix documentary. I mean, they are very much trying to portray themselves as victims, whether it's victims of the racist British tabloid press or the racist members of the royal family. They're trying to portray themselves as having been hounded across the sea because they couldn't endure the oppressive atmosphere in Britain, particularly in the palace, which is obviously complete nonsense. And I think it does show just how ridiculous the oppression Olympics has become. If people like Harry and Meghan, who after all still have their titles, their net worth is supposedly $100 million plus, they live in this fabulous ranch in Montecito, they live fabulous lives of international jet setters, if they can portray themselves as victims, it shows just how absurd it is for people to claim victimhood.
And I agree with you, I have to say. And I think I noticed some of the language around one of the recent palace situations about the charity dinner and where someone was asked where they were from repeatedly or whatever. And I noticed some of the language that was there saying, you know, I've been abused, I've been violated. This is an act of abuse. And it's kind of, I've got to say, I find that a little bit extreme. Disclosure, I've not been in a situation where people are repeatedly pressing me to see where I'm from. And, you know, if someone says that that's upsetting, then who am I to say it's not? But then when we're using this language of, I'm traumatised, really?
Well, I think one thing we encounter, Michelle, at the Free Speech Union is that the policing of speech, trying to prohibit the use of certain words, certain phrases, trying to turn universities into safe spaces, to prevent microaggressions, to attach trigger warnings to classic works of English literature. It all seems to be predicated on this idea that universities are full of very fragile, delicate people who will easily be upset, traumatised, sent into a spiral of mental ill health if they encounter anything they find remotely offensive or disagreeable. And often the people doing this language policing, shouting the loudest about it, are upper middle class white males who are sort of presenting themselves as saviours of these poor, beleaguered, put upon women of colour or trans people or, you know, LGBTQ plus people. They're always claiming to be standing up on their behalf for these people who can't speak for themselves. And often that's sort of patronising. It's denying those groups agency. And often if you talk to people in those groups, they actually aren't too concerned about the space needing to be safe and being easily offended. It's all a kind of, you know, imaginary game being played by these woke political activists to silence their opponents.
Yeah, and this is big business, isn't it? There's a lot of money to be made in victimhood. There's courses, groups, this body, that charity, you name it, set up for, I don't know, whether it's whatever the social ill is. I mean, I could list about 100, there's so many of them. And there's a lot of people make a lot of money off people being upset or being victims of things, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we should get here on the various points that Toby made, and I agree with pretty much everything that Toby just said, but there are degrees of victimhood. And so there are degrees of the kind of aggression that people feel. That if somebody feels that they have been a victim of racism and want to speak out about it, I think that's up to them. So in that sense, I think that Meghan was right, if that's what she felt, to actually say that. I don't much like the whining in the Netflix documentary. I don't think some of the things they're complaining about are particularly valid. But it depends where the problem lies. I mean, if you are being sexually harassed and you are a young woman or a young man who really can't cope with it, that I would consider to be serious, and that's why those are the people who need to come forward.
And you say, I'm using your language, you say if those young people can't cope with it, Toby was just making a point a second ago that you've got all of these trigger words, safe spaces, you wrap these kids up in cotton wool, heaven forbid they hear anything that might upset them or offend them. And one of Joanna Lumley's points was in Hair Day, I mean, she's a bit older now, but in Hair Day, she was saying, you know, if someone harassed her or groped her, she'd smack them, she'd whack the hand away, she'd stand up for herself. And, you know, is there something to be said about that?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's got the confidence and the ability to do that, as Joanna Lumley clearly had, that's absolutely great. If you can deal with the situation immediately and you can deal with it yourself, that's fine. An awful lot of people can't. An awful lot of people are vulnerable, don't have that self-confidence, do find it very scary, and then find they have nowhere to turn. And those are the people I'm talking about and want to protect.
But Toby's concern is making that worse, isn't it? What Toby's flagging is quite right, and that is feeding into what you're then saying, what we're then seeing in your experience is the end product of the things that Toby's just been saying. But you wanted to come and make a point then.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Michelle. The culture of victimhood does not breed resilience or mental toughness. It's quite the opposite. But just to come back on one of Nigel's points, he said that if Meghan claims that she feels she is the victim of racism, then who are we to gainsay her? And I think that's one of the problems with the culture of victimhood is this kind of, you have to believe people, even if it seems a bit implausible, it's nonetheless their lived experience. But what that overlooks is that in some cases it's performative victimhood when when Meghan complains that she feels like a victim and presents herself as quite fragile and vulnerable as a way of trying to, win points in the oppression Olympics, I don't believe it. It seems like she's performing that role in order to kind of score a point and, in her case, make a great deal of money. Looking behind her eyes, but I don't believe she does feel that. But in a way, by saying you have to believe her...
That's a judgment you're making about her feelings.
But you're sort of saying that whenever people claim to feel offended or upset or traumatised, we have to take that literally because it would be terrible in case they're in case they're speaking truthfully and honestly. To not believe them would be terrible. But actually, it seems obvious in many cases that they are just performing for the cameras. They're just pretending. I mean, we find this kind of faux offence taking all the time in the work I do. People claiming to be offended. They've gone through someone's their social media, found something to be offended by, and then scream about how offensive it is from the rooftops, and then share it with as many people as they can, even though they've decided that it's horrible and offensive and upsetting. Why share it then? It all seems to be a performance and not genuine offence, not genuine upset, just a way of trying to score points, win an argument.
It makes a good point.
It is a good point. And again, once again, on that social media example, I'm with you on that. I do think if somebody actually feels that they have been the victim of racism, yes, you must take that at face value. If someone like Meghan says that she feels that she felt suicidal, I think you take something like that seriously. Whatever the background to it, whether it was justified or whatever, is a whole different matter. If that's what she is saying and that is her feeling, I don't think we are the people to turn around and make a judgment on those feelings.
You see, I think, of course, there are genuine cases and they should be taken very seriously, and it would be wrong to ignore them. But I do think we also oughtn't to abandon our common sense, and sometimes I think it's right to be sceptical. I don't think in every case we have to take literally and seriously a claim to be a victim, particularly when it's in the context of, a media war against the royal family.
But at an extreme end, that's one of the reasons why rape reporting is so low, is because people do not believe the victim. And so...
I thought rape reporting was quite high, but it was the convictions.
Well, convictions are low too, but the whole thing is there are far more rapes around than people who actually report it. OK, this is an extreme end, but what the police have been told is you start from the premise that the victim is telling the truth.
Well, to give a topical example, Nigel, the problem with that approach is that it seems to fly in the face of the presumption of innocence. So to take the woman at Buckingham Palace who claimed to be the victim of racism, because everyone believed her, because it's taboo to express any scepticism when someone claims to be the victim of racism, Lady Hussey was automatically assumed to be guilty. There was no due process, and she was just tossed out the window.
No,
that's wrong, surely. That's an affront to our sense of justice.
I mean, what happened to her was completely wrong. The palace quite clearly panicked and said that that she had to go because they have this zero tolerance of racism.
So we shouldn't have believed the allegation in that instance. We should have, perhaps taken it seriously, and there should have been a proper examination of the evidence. We shouldn't have just assumed she was right because that was her lived experience, and therefore assumed Lady Hussey was guilty.
And you make a very good point as well, which is, in this day and age, heaven help anyone that says, hang on a second, something doesn't add up here to me. This whole kind of transcribe, or if you even dare to even query some of these things, people jump on you quicker than I don't know what. I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'm going to have some of your reaction to what you've just been hearing there. What do you think? The hook for this was Joanna Lumley saying that we're turning into a pathetic nation of people desperately seeking victims. Nigel makes the opposite point, where actually sometimes he's saying that victims daren't do anything about it. Toby's point, and I think it's a great one, is actually you're surrounding all these young kids in safe spaces and bubble wrap and all the rest of it. So then when they do encounter stuff, then they struggle to know how to deal with it properly. You tell me your thoughts, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, there's been a ruling by a tribunal basically that says that the care homes were right to sack workers that refused to get a vaccine. I just want to take a little look at this, see whether or not we agree with this, what the implications of this ruling are potentially going forward. So don't go anywhere, and I'll see you in about 2 minutes.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Jubes and Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Alongside me till 7 o'clock tonight, my panel, Nigel Nelson, the political editor of the Sunday People, and alongside him as well, the director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young. We've just been having a very interesting conversation in the break. I mean, goodness only knows whether or not it was broadcasted or not. It wasn't the start of the programme, but assuming that it wasn't, we were just talking about the difference between people. I was saying, the example that Toby was just giving, that there's some younger people in Parliament that are getting harassed and they won't dare speak out. And I was just explaining, heaven help anyone that tries to harass me. I wouldn't have any of it. To Nigel's point then, said, but that's because you're confident and some people are not confident. My response to that was, I think confidence is a choice. I think it's you make a decision as an individual. I actually want to be confident, outgoing. Once you make that decision, you can then start looking at ways, means, tools to create that. And I just find that a real fascinating point. I wonder what you make to that at home. Do you think you can choose to be confident and choose your reactions to think, or do you think that your character is just your character, it is what it is, and on you go? Lots of response to that first topic, by the way. Simon says, Joanna Lumley is so right. The new fashion is to be a victim is not the only one. You could also say that having a mental health issue is a fashionable statement as well. Well, she did say that, actually, a few years ago. I think she almost said that word for word, and she got in trouble for that then. But I've got to say, a lot of people would agree with that sentiment. Mental health issues are awful, but people do often use normal, natural emotions and put them under that label of a mental health issue, don't they? Ian says, go Joe. That's challenging for my accent. He absolutely agrees with Joanna Lumley, and he's saying that more people need to stand up for themselves, which is exactly the conversation that Nigel and I have just been having. Patricia says, thank goodness for Toby Young. No offence, but Nigel has spent too much time in diversity and inclusion brainwashing sessions. Have you been on brainwashing? Have you been on brainwashing courses? Have you been on diversity courses, I meant to say?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I call them indoctrination classes. Well, you can make your mind up whether or not they've been effective or not with Nigel. I don't know, I'll leave it to you. Right, an employment tribunal has ruled that care home bosses were within their rights to sack members of staff who refuse to be vaccinated. This is basically 5 workers. This tribunal was 5 workers who wouldn't get vaccinated. They took it to tribunal, but the judge threw out their claims and said that the care home was basically just trying to protect their clinically vulnerable patients. I found this quite interesting. Toby Young, what do you make to it?
Yeah, I was surprised by this verdict. I would have thought that requiring staff at a care home to be vaccinated as a condition of remaining employed would have been a breach was a breach of their employment rights, and demanding that they do that was not a reasonable request on the part of their employer. So I'm surprised they didn't get a finding for unfair dismissal, particularly in light of what we now know about the vaccines, which is that they may protect the person who's had the vaccine from severe symptoms of the disease, but they don't actually stop them from catching COVID or passing it on. So if the vaccines don't create this wonderful protective shield, which protects vulnerable people, such as care home residents, then what justification is there for sacking someone who refuses to get vaccinated?
But if the care home owner at the time felt, and the narrative at the time was, you know, because you used to say, didn't you, take this not just for you, but to protect your grandma and all the rest of it. So if that was the narrative of the time and what they were doing was acting in what they thought was the best interest, then would that sway your thoughts?
Yeah, I would have hoped that the judge would have considered contemporary evidence and even the evidence at the time. I mean, if you actually paid attention to the trial data and what people at Pfizer and AstraZeneca actually said, they weren't actually claiming that the vaccines protected people from catching the disease from the vaccinated.
And a Pfizer exec admitted that anyway, didn't they? Recently, that she said we were never doing trials to look at transmission. Nigel Nelson, where are you on it?
Well, I think that I was surprised too about the verdict. However, I think it was the right one. I think in a situation where, and we've got to go back to when all this happened, there was a lot we didn't know. One of the things we thought was that vaccines were the best protection both against transmission and serious illness. And also the government had done an awful lot of damage by that time by sending patients back from hospital untested back into care homes anyway. So in a situation like this, I think that I'm broadly against vaccine mandates, but when it comes to something specific where the bosses at the care homes thought that there would be a genuine health risk to their residents or the people that carers going out to visit, I think they were absolutely right to do what they did. And as far as the people concerned were, they had a choice. They could have had the vaccine. They stood for their principles, whether they be religious or based on a conspiracy theory. That was their right to go and do that. But principles have consequences. And the consequence in this case was the loss of employment. And I think that's about right. It's a specific case. It's not for the general population, but it does seem to me that given where we were then, and that's what the judge was making his decision on, that he got it about right.
And the people that were fired, because there were a lot of them, or the people that chose to leave the profession, perhaps more accurately, because of these COVID vaccines, do you think they should be reinstated now?
Well, I think there probably could be. I mean, I don't see any problem about the future. I mean, the various people here, I would imagine, will be able to get future employment. The argument was over an unfair dismissal, a specific unfair dismissal. But yes, I do. I mean, the whole vaccines have changed the whole landscape as far as COVID is concerned. And you probably could now go back into frontline healthcare jobs without needing to be vaccinated. But at the time, we're talking about a completely different time, and we forget how much things have changed since that period.
Do you want to come back on any of that, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fundamental issue here is that people should be able to determine what they put into their own bodies. I believe in the principle of bodily autonomy. And lots of people who support that principle when it comes to a woman's right to abortion don't support it when it comes to the right to refuse a vaccination.
But should there be consequence to that choice? Because I guess...
That's the point I'm making.
I think to my mind, saying to someone that if you don't get vaccinated, you'll lose your job, that's not the same. That's an unacceptably severe consequence. That's essentially coercing someone, if they want to keep their job, into having a vaccine.
That's one thing. But if you're working with clinically vulnerable elderly people that are literally in the at-risk group of COVID, wouldn't that sway you a bit?
Well, not if I actually understood how ineffective the vaccines were at protecting the vulnerable.
I mean, this would be what happens if a soldier subsequently becomes a pacifist. Wouldn't we expect that soldier to leave the army? The Just Stop Oil protesters, the Extinction Rebellion protesters take a consequence for their principles by ending up in jail. these seem to be sort of quid pro quo.
What do you mean about a soldier being a pacifist having to leave the army?
A soldier gets religion, gets God during service, becomes a pacifist, says, I cannot bear arms, I cannot go out and do my job. Would you not expect that soldier, then as a result of that, to have to leave the army?
No, if you literally was sitting there as a soldier and say, you know what, I can't go into hand-to-hand combat, I wouldn't say, right, you off-ski then. I'd say, you know what, if that's really the situation that we're in, the army is a broad spectrum of different roles. The army get involved in absolutely everything. Hence, every 10 seconds these days, it seems to be that the army's getting pulled in to bail out this, that and the other. So no, I wouldn't sack them. At the very least, I would redeploy them.
I think the army would
also, but I think where that argument breaks down is it's not a perfect analogy, because in the case of the soldier, he's changing his mind and he's deciding that he no longer wants to be, in the armed forces business. But in the case of these care workers, they didn't change their minds, rather the policy changed.
Well, do you not think it's events changing round them? I mean, prior to COVID, this wouldn't have been an issue. Once we'd had COVID and in the situation we were in at the time, and the feeling that vaccines would actually make a material difference, it was the event that changed things.
But also, what about reversibility? So if I'm a soldier and I join the army to fight, and then I decide, I believe in God, don't want to fight, whatever, I can then change my mind back again. If I'm a care worker that, for whatever reason, let's not open that can of worms, but for whatever reason didn't want the vaccine, if I then had to take it to have my job, well, that's irreversible then. That's things in my system. I can't suddenly then take it out again.
No, I take that point. But I mean, but again, you had that choice in the first place. The choice was whether you had the vaccine or not, albeit something you did reluctantly. And keep your job. So
I think in the case of the soldier, he
shouldn't brought that up.
I know. He's going to be kicking himself. He's going to be on the way home going, "God, why did I mention soldiers?"
There is an important difference here, which is the soldier, if he decides midway through his...
the way you're all saying he.
Sorry.
This is
if she decides,
I'm offended.
If she decides midway through her career that she no longer wants to kill anyone, and that it would be against her conscience to do so, she is breaching the contract, I think, the implied contract under which she joined the army. But what happened here is the terms of the contract changed, and they were changed by the employer. And I think one thing we have to take in consideration too is that because care homes did start insisting that people had to be vaccinated, and because it then became the law that people had to be vaccinated until that law was changed on, the 22nd of March of this year, many people left that profession. And as a result, we now have a huge labour shortage in the care sector and a big problem, a problem caused by the unintended consequence of this draconian policy. Yeah, and if you're a regular viewer for GB News, and you have been for a while, you might remember we did an Outdate the Mandate campaign on this show, if you remember that, when it was happening as well within the NHS. Anyway, going to take a quick break. Let me know your thoughts on that one. But when I come back, I want to talk to you about the definition of a woman. A dictionary now has changed it, basically to say that it's someone who identifies as a female, even though they are said to be a different sex at birth. Does that matter? And I want to look at, if it does matter, why? What are the consequences of changing a definition? Anything or not? I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs and Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Jubes and Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, right through until 7 o'clock this evening. Alongside me, I have Nigel Nelson, the political editor of the Sunday People, and the director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young. There's a lot of debate about the whole Joanna Lumley thing at the start of the programme, about whether or not we're basically pathetic and desperate to be victims. Jane says, Michelle, you can absolutely choose whether or not you are a victim or a survivor in life. It is a mindset, a mentality, I think, is the essence there. And I have to say, on the whole, I do actually agree with that. Some people, though, are saying that actually people are different. Not everyone is as strong as each other, and you can't make that choice. Barbara says, I totally agree with Toby. Young people these days seem to be happy to be victims. You're quite harsh, though, Barbara, because you're saying you think they do this to get attention. You are suggesting you should bring back conscription. All the young people need to develop a backbone. Peter has emailed in saying, what is your guest talking about? Is he suggesting there are no Christians in the army? Please can you remind him of the words for God and for country? You are going to regret making that point. Honestly, he's going to be kicking himself. He'll wake up at 3 in the morning going like, oh, why did I say that point? Anyway, look, what is the definition of a woman? I mean, if an alien kind of landed right now, they'd be a bit confused, because 5 years ago there was probably a very simple answer to this, but it's all kind of got a little bit confused for certain people, hasn't it? Well, luckily the dictionary is on hand to help us with such things. The Cambridge Dictionary, though, has made an amendment, a change, an addition to its definition of a woman. And it now says, so it does say, I have to be honest, it does still say it's an adult female, but now there's an additional definition adding to this, which says it's someone who identifies as female. What do you think to this, Nigel Nelson?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a political thing. I think it's quite simply language is a living, breathing kind of thing, and as a result, it keeps changing. You wouldn't nowadays use the word gay, for instance, to mean happy. So it shows how language changes over the years. What the dictionary is doing, and it's only using it as a secondary definition, is saying that people now commonly refer to trans women as women. And they're included in the dictionary because that has now become a commonly used term, which seems to me perfectly fair. That's how dictionaries keep developing.
So your definition, you're happy with the definition of a woman to be an adult who lives and identifies as female, though they may have been said to be a different sex at birth. You think that's an accurate description?
I am perfectly happy with that definition of a woman, yes.
Toby?
I agree with Nigel that dictionaries should change as the way in which people use language changes. But I'm sceptical that in this case, that's why the Cambridge Dictionary has made this change. I don't think very many people, very few in fact, I think are using the word woman to mean someone who identifies as female but who was born male. After all, that is a tiny, tiny percentage of the population, much less than 1%. Is it really plausible that so many people are now using the word woman to mean it in that way rather than the conventional way, adult human female, that they had to add this definition? To my mind, they've added this because this is how they think the word woman should be used, in a less trans-exclusionary way. So it's not really a dictionary, it's more of a political manifesto, or there are elements of political prescriptiveness creeping in, which I think is wrong. It seems to me to be, it's not a dictionary anymore, it's something else, if it's about how we should talk rather than the way we are talking.
Yeah, and I think your point there about how you should talk is quite an interesting one, because if you're somebody who does sit there and think, actually, no, a woman is a biological female, full stop, then you can have a separate conversation if you want about the gender of someone, about how gender identifies and presents, whether a man wears a suit or a dress, whether a woman wears a dress or whatever. I mean, whatever, that's kind of gender and that's presentation of gender. But if you are someone, Nigel, that says, no, actually, you cannot change your biological sex. This whole notion of you were assigned at birth, as though someone just sits there with a checklist going, right, yeah, we've had 3 females today, we need to have a little bit of a quota going on there, you can have an assigned male, female. I mean, you can't even disagree with the concept that someone can change their biological sex these days without being called all manner of names and having an amount of pressure put onto you.
Well, I mean, you can't change your biological sex. What you can change is your gender, and that's the whole point. But
do you think the two are different, your biological sex
Yes,
and your
I think gender
gender
and sex are different, and one of the problems has been is confusing the two. But rather than get onto the debate of the whole gender trans debate, what we're talking about is how people interact with each other, because that's what language is all about. If we had a trans woman in the studio with us now, we would treat her as a woman. We would talk to her as a woman. We'd use female pronouns. So that's the point the dictionary is making, that a trans woman is therefore a woman according to the definition of a woman.
I think Nigel's missed out on one of his diversity training courses. I'm afraid, Nigel, that the current fashionable view is not just that gender is a social construct, but that sex is a social construct too. And that's why there should be no obstacles to changing sex. And often they refer to, I mean, like this, they say the new definition of woman is someone who lives and identifies as female, though they may have been said to have had a different sex at birth. See, they're trying to be careful not to say they had a different sex at birth, because they're saying it's not rooted in biology. It's not chromosomal. It's just something that's assigned to you at birth, often by a blinkered binary doctor who imagines that sex only comes in 2 flavours.
Do you consider a trans woman to be a woman?
What do you define as a trans woman?
Someone who has changed her gender from male to female.
How do you change your gender from male to female?
Well, I mean, there are a variety of ways of doing that, but who identifies as a female who was previously born a male, if you like the dictionary definition there. I mean, the dictionary is the same thing for men, by the way, that the definition of a man in this dictionary.
But I think you've misunderstood. When people say a trans woman is a woman, they don't mean that this person who was born biologically male now identifies as having the gender female. The claim that a trans woman is a woman is the claim that they are ontologically, legally, in every meaningful respect, indistinguishable from a woman. And that's going much further than just saying they've changed their gender. The idea is that you can now change your sex, and I think that's what people object to, because they think it undermines sex-based women's rights.
About language, that when you meet a trans woman, you treat her as a woman. You see that person as a woman, unless you think a trans woman and a woman are completely different
Why can't I
species.
just see them as a trans person?
Because they want to be a woman.
But if I want to be a man, would you see me as a man?
If you want to be a man, I would see you as a man, yes.
But when you say that, I mean, you would treat a trans woman as a woman, because that's the way they want to be treated, would that include allowing them to compete against biological women in sports like rugby
now we
and
come on to the
weightlifting?
entire trans
Would it
debate.
include admitting them to women's prisons, particularly if they're on the sex
We
offenders
go far away
register?
from the language there and we come down to the technicalities of it. No, I wouldn't, by the way.
OK.
Well, there you go. That's a can of worms that we could open and get into. I've got to say, there's a slight unease about having this conversation. And there shouldn't be, actually. It's a very strange topic because people get so kind of het up about it and rude and all the rest of it. And anyway...
You're right, Michelle. At the Free Speech Union, I'd say we've represented more people this year who've got into trouble for saying they don't think trans women are women and for disputing some aspect of trans rights dogma than any other category. It's extraordinary how het up, how much of a live wire it is.
Well, there you go. It could keep us talking, but I do have to go to a break. And when I come back, I want to get into a topic that has got you guys talking and got us talking last night. The concept of food banks. They seem to be popping up on every single corner. Whenever we have conversations about strikes, you'll often hear sentences like, nurses have to rely on food banks. And it's got me pondering, and it got you talking last night as well. Do you think food bank usage has almost become politically weaponised now? Do you think that everyone using them should be using one? You tell me your thoughts. I know some of you have some strong opinions on this, so I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Jubes and Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Alongside me, Toby Young and Nigel Nelson, right through till 7 o'clock tonight. If you watched the show last night, we were talking about striking. One of my panel made the comment, nurses are having to go to food banks, and essentially we should be ashamed of that in the current climate. That sentence gets trotted out a lot, and it really got me thinking, it got you guys talking. Nigel Nelson, I personally think this whole usage of food banks, the frequency and all the rest of it, it has become politically weaponised. I don't really see any reason why someone earning 30-odd grand a year literally cannot afford food. What am I missing?
Probably back to language again. That what the word weaponised sort of conjures up the idea of a missile which becomes weaponised when a warhead goes on the end of it. In other words, the missile was harmless beforehand, and then the warhead weaponises it. So the suggestion it's being politically weaponised, a thing that Ed Miliband got into trouble with back in 2015 when he said the same about the NHS, is that the whole thing is sort of harmless, and it's not. Food banks now have seen a huge increase in the number of people who go to them. 9 out of 10 are reporting more people coming this year than they did previously. Donations are going down because people can't afford it.
And do you think this increase, I'm really sorry, just for time reasons, I just want to get straight to the point here. Do you think food bank usage is going up because people literally cannot afford to eat?
Yes.
Or do you think food bank usage is going up because people have cottoned on to the fact that actually I can get some free food if I go there?
People literally cannot afford to eat. With energy bills 96% up this year.
So on 34 grand a year or whatever, you think that that's realistic, that you can't afford to eat?
Depending what your other commitments are, yes.
Right. Toby Young.
Well, I think you're both right in that it's true that food bank usage has increased, and that's at least partly driven by an increase in food poverty. But at the same time, the increase in food bank usage has certainly been politically weaponised. I remember participating in a debate about this on the eve of the 2015 general election, and discovered that the reason food bank usage had increased significantly since Labour was in power is because Gordon Brown prevented claimants at benefit offices from being referred to food banks if they claimed poverty, whereas under the Tories that was possible. And the reason food bank usage had increased dramatically in 2015 compared to 5 years earlier was partly because of that, and partly because there was a lot of delay in people being able to receive their benefits because of the rollout of universal credit. But I don't think it's necessarily the most reliable index of food poverty. So in France, for instance, the use of food banks per capita is twice as high as it is in the UK. But food poverty is certainly not twice as high in France as it is in the UK. It's one indicator of food poverty, but it's not exhaustive. And there are many reasons why food bank usage is increasing in addition to an increase in food poverty.
Yeah, I just find it quite interesting. You guys have been in touch with this a lot. You're saying, Chris, I'm going to read this out because I know a lot of people will agree with you, but as soon as I read this out, people will be upset with me saying you've been harsh. Before anyone uses a food bank, they should be checked for whether or not they take drugs or smoke or buy alcohol. If they do any of the above and spend their money on any of the above, they shouldn't be entitled to free food. I'm going to leave you to ponder what you think to that. Many people are saying that actually, if you're earning 30 plus grand a year and you need a food bank, the problem is not with your income, it's with your ability to budget. What do you think to that? Again, this is a conversation that I could have that could rumble on and on, but look at the time. I've been told that Nigel is patiently waiting. So Nigel Nelson, I shall say thank you to you, and Toby Young to you too. Nigel Farage, I'll say hello to you. What have you got coming up for us?
Well, Michelle, it was predictable, but it's still very sad and very awful when it happens. 4 confirmed dead in the Channel today, another 4 missing. There may be more than that for all we know. I'm going to debate tonight. How many people have to die in the English Channel before we start taking our responsibilities seriously and stopping these small boats from crossing? All of that and much more coming up in a few minutes. But first, let's get the all-important weather.
Good evening and welcome to the latest weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth from the Met Office. It's staying very cold over the next few days with further snow showers and some ice out there as well. It's very cold at the moment because we've got this strong feed of Arctic air. You can see these deep blue colours coming down all the way from the north and spreading across the whole of the UK. So very cold air at the moment. And that means we'll continue to see some snow showers pushing in from the north across northern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, as well as northeastern England. So there's snow and ice warnings out through Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. Elsewhere, a dry, clear but very cold night. Another sharp frost out there, rurally down as low as